Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Triple F podcast. This evening, I am very excited to be hosting with a guest. The one and only Victoria Felkar is on our airways and our screen today. So I'll be recording for YouTube and for the usual Spotify and podcast. I have been excited about this podcast for a long time. Someone with the mind of this absolute genius and pioneer in our industry coming on to talk to you guys today. It's mind blowing for myself. So I hope you guys are ready because we're about to go on a roller coaster. Victoria, introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you for that introduction.
Well,
Introduce myself. So it's always a hard one for me, but I'm a researcher. So I'm a doctoral researcher. Specifically, my work is in sport medicine, looking at female athlete health. But to get to this point, I've had to still study the male body. I've had to still study overall medicine. My research specifically looks at the use of steroid hormones, and I use that term quite broadly because I do look at both the use of androgens, but then also estrogens and progesterones. So I look at those general kind of steroid hormones. And for listeners or viewers right away, you guys are going to hear that I try not to use terms like reproductive hormones or sex hormones because that really doesn't describe what we're talking about. And some people might go like, oh, that's semantics, but it actually does really change how we look at these hormones, how we talk about them, how they get prescribed, how they get managed. So I like to use those broad terms. I've been in weight training for, 17, 18 years now. So it's been a long journey. And as a female in our industry, I've kind of been able to see the changes that have happened in the last like 15, 20 years, which is amazing because more and more women are now competing and training and really focusing on building muscle. But at the same time, I feel that the knowledge and the education to help support them is not there. We're kind of got this weird lag happening. So on one hand, love it. It's phenomenal to be able to see. I always joke around saying like I'm from the pre-DLB era when it wasn't okay for women to be in the gym, where you were honestly typically the only female in the weight room. And now the numbers are growing and that's so amazing, but it's also so scary because just that knowledge gap is vast. And as a result, there's a lot of individuals that aren't getting the care and the support that they need to be able to do this journey as healthy as they can, or just in a realistic way. So yeah, that's a bit of my background. I can keep going, but I don't want it to turn into this huge like song and dance. So
that literally is perfect because I'd say 80 to 90% of the audience are females who are just starting their journey in the gym or starting their journey into kind of competing in bodybuilding, or advanced bodybuilders looking onto becoming pros. So when I first heard you on John Jewett's podcast, I was just taken back instantly because I've been saying for as long as I can remember that the females looking to get into bodybuilding now is becoming more and more prominent, but the education and guidance and support that backs that for the females who are looking to go down, say, the enhanced route, is just not there. There just seems to be so much more out there for males. It just seems to be discussed so much more, and it doesn't seem to be that same level. It almost still seems very taboo that people aren't allowed to talk about it, or as soon as someone mentions females looking at going into bodybuilding or enhanced bodybuilding, it's almost like, oh no, you can't talk about that. As soon as I was listening to you, I was like, this is someone that needs to be heard more. And instantly, as soon as I heard you, I was like, right, this is someone I want on my podcast so that I can get another voice out there, because obviously there are educators out there that are doing it, but there just doesn't seem to be that many. So when I found another one, I wanted to shout about it.
I appreciate that. So, I guess that's part of my own story is that I was a female athlete. I was a ballet dancer growing up, and I went through a really chaotic hormonal circumstance when I was 18. And it was, I was stuck in that world of like, well, what do I do? Doctors didn't know what to do with me because I was a young, healthy, active female. And so it didn't make sense what was happening to me, but I was weight training and, right away, like getting those labs back and like your CK is through the roof and your liver enzymes are messed up, but not because it's your liver, it's because you trained a double the day before. And so kind of going through this world being like, well, what is going on? And there was some very crazy things going on that kind of goes back to why I study what I do today. But part of it for me was that my androgens rapidly changed naturally. So my endogenous androgens just went through the roof because I hadn't actually gone through puberty properly. And so all of a sudden, I was being accused of being on anabolic androgenic steroids. And as a young 18-year-old, like I really didn't understand everything that went into that because there wasn't social media back then. It wasn't like I was reading muscle mags that the old gym guys brought in for me because I was just like so hungry to learn everything I could about bodybuilding. So of course I saw these like ads in the back of like muscle mag and flex and MD for like horse and veterinary like steroids from the 90s. And I like had this weird hazy idea, and then those social conceptions too about like, I remember going to the gym once with my dad at like 16 and he was like, oh yeah, the juice monkeys. And so like, I had this weird idea, but then myself being this young female being, accused of being on X, Y, and Z and being like, what does that even mean? And then going to the library, learning more because I was just so hungry for knowledge. And I, in that period of time, I actually realized that in many ways it was a compliment because I was getting told that I looked, jacked and strong and all these things I wanted to be. But then in the medical system, being completely, accused of being on certain compounds that I didn't even know what they were at the time, or being accused of closet eating or binging and everything else because my weight was just completely climbing without any fault of my own because of this hormonal environment. So it really pushed me to begin to explore the concepts of like, what does it mean to be a female? What does it mean to be a female athlete? What does it mean to have these different types of hormonal kind of fluctuations or changes, whether we're talking about endogenous or exogenous, and how can we learn? Because I started to get more active in the fitness community, especially like in my 20s, and going like, there's such parallels between certain natural hyper androgenic states where women will have high levels of androgens and what you see in women that are using androgenic and anabolic androgenic compounds. So I really in 2016 came out with a couple models to begin to explore this more. And luckily, Ken Kanakin, he's the founder of the Swiss Symposium, which is an amazing event, gave me a platform back then to start to talk about this. And really that kind of kicked off my journey of like doing podcasts and stuff like this. But as I'm also still writing my PhD, there's only so much public education I can do. So I'm very grateful that you've given me that platform today.
No, you're more than welcome. More than welcome. I could not have you on, and it's not the thing that kind of like struck me as well. It's not that you've just gone away and you've educated, but you've also lived it as well. You've educated, and you've also applied it within practice. So it's not just someone who has dedicated time to just reading through books. You've done all walks of life through it. You've helped athletes, you've done it to yourself, and then you've also gone away and educated yourself. So, I find that the people that you should be listening to are the ones that live, eat, and breathe it, right? So, listening to your podcast, like I said with John, you've gone through kind of experiences that you had or situations with athletes or coming away from that and applying it to other cohorts within, say, not just bodybuilding, but training as well. It makes sense, so much sense to have you on here to just bring some awareness, because kind of going back to what you said as well, it's not just the females that are looking to go enhanced, it's also females that just don't understand their own cycles. Because I've had clients that come to me as well, and like some of the first questions I ask, if someone's looking to take bodybuilding seriously, is what are your plans after bodybuilding? Are you looking at children? Are you looking at things that could potentially be impacted from bodybuilding? And they're kind of like, well, why is this important? I was like, of course it is. It's massively important. And when you start like delving into information about their cycle, it's almost like they have no idea. They don't know. They just kind of roll with the punches each month to month. So, kind of listening to what you were saying and having the female kind of make sure they're fully aware about everything that's going on, not only leads to like a healthier background, but also more progressive and more positive in regards to bodybuilding as well.
Oh, absolutely. As women, we've been and I mean, I can get to the whole like social and cultural side of this, but at the end of the day, it's we have not been educated about the female menstrual cycle. And what education we have been is been very much skewed from things like the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, the use of hormonal contraceptives has really skewed the language, even the use of like sanitary products and the marketing that you kind of are indoctrinated into growing up, and that it's taught us that the bleed is this the grand finale of your monthly cycle, and if you don't have the bleed, well, oh, it's it's terrible, and oh, but if you have it, it's annoying, and it's unhygienic and all this other BS. And it's completely ignored the fact that the bleed can happen with so many different underlying hormonal circumstances. It can happen from so many different underlying kind of physiological environments that aren't all conducive to, like, big air quotes here, like health. And so the bleed is not this marker of what it means to be a healthy female. And that when we think of like, what does that menstrual cycle represent, even some of the new apps that are out there for menstrual cycle tracking, they're not actually educating women on like, hey, the bleed is one piece of a very complicated physiological process that's influenced by our social world, our psychological state, and our physiological or biological state. It is such a chaotic, just, I mean, network of all these different things working together. It's not linear. It's not the same every month. Even if you bleed, so let's say every 28 days, the actual environment of your body and where your hormones go every month will vary. And that's okay. Human beings are meant to vary day to day, hour to hour. It's when things really start to go astray that we need to start investigating that. And unfortunately, women don't get taught what it means for things not to be going the way that they're going. And so they kind of willfully accept that, hey, every month I've got terrible cramps, but I just have to live with it. It's like, no, you don't. Your menstrual cycle shouldn't be completely destructive. You shouldn't have your entire life have to get put on hold for that last 2 weeks or that week of your bleed or whatever it might be. Really, the menstrual cycle, it is an important physiological part of how our bodies work, because we're making our steroid hormones. If it's going, everything is going the way that it should be. And so on the other side of the conversation, just stopping it and going through, whether it's a hormonal contraceptive route, or if you're in your 40s or 50s, hysterectomy route, because it's not the way that you want it to be or it should be, that's also not the solution, because there's problems with that too. So that, and I think especially within our industry, I think that honestly, I think things are changing, that there's at least a bit more conversation about it. When I was started training and got more serious into bodybuilding, not having a bleed was almost this like sign of like significance. Like, it was like, great, you're either lean enough, or you're training hard enough, or oh, it's annoying, you don't want to have that anyways, it really messes up leg day, or whatever people used to say. I think now at least we're starting to, like, the discourse is starting to change maybe a little bit, but I also am fearful that it's not changing in a positive direction either, because it's kind of just shooting out these generalized statements or these blanket statements without actually educating women on what it is.
I fully agree, and it's exactly like you say. Like, throughout a contest prep, for example, a female loses their cycle, and it's like, okay, cool, yeah, I'm getting lean. This is supposed to happen. It is not, but yes, you can almost come to expect it. But there's a lot more going on there, and this is another thing as well. The detail that you've gone into in regards to the female cycle, there are so many more things at play that people don't realize. And I think if females understood each section of their cycle, what it does, why it's there, what's actually happening, what's being produced, why it's being produced, then I think maybe there's almost not like a level of respect for that hormonal change that needs to be there. And the same when it comes into like a prep, for example. A female 9 times out of 10 now, because it's more spoken about, will go into the prep and say, okay, well, there's probably going to be a point that I lose this, but I'll deal with that afterwards. And then I've also seen that post show, it's not dealt with afterwards, and it continues to get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the menstrual cycle, and this is where I think we have to be careful, because It's the ovulatory menstrual cycle. It's when a woman ovulates and regularly ovulates with a sufficient duration of ovulation. And so for ovulation, for any listeners or viewers that don't know, it's that middle point in the cycle. It's a marker of fertility. So, a lot of women who may have gone through wanting to conceive or any issues with conceiving, they'll probably know what ovulation is, because that's something that gets kind of drilled into that conception world. But when it, outside of conception world, it is an incredibly important marker of a creator. So it not only is a creator of women's health, but it's also an indicator. So if you're regularly ovulating, it's an indication that things are where they need to be in terms of your internal and external health. It also is going to promote and create health. It's required to make sufficient amounts of progesterone, which progesterone is one of the master steroid hormones in the female body. It's the yang to the yin of estrogens. And so we have to have this balance between the two. If we go like another step further, it's happened. So how we make progesterone is through this process of ovulation. And ovulation is when the egg or the ovum, which is in your ovary, gets released from the follicle. And if it's not inseminated, then it will burst and create this flux of progesterone. And so not every time you bleed, this will happen. It should happen regularly, but a lot of times, particularly in the athletic population, there is either what is an anovulatory cycle, meaning that you had a bleed without ovulation, or a silent ovulatory disturbance, which means that not enough progesterone was produced, or it was not produced for long enough. You want to have progesterone being produced for about half the duration of your cycle, so that it will last you until the next time you ovulate. And so in the athletic population, there's this really high rate of silent ovulatory disturbances or anovulation, and that causes problems over time, because as women, we need to have progesterone for our bones and our brains. It's cardioprotective, it's metabolic protective, our thyroid health. So it's so much more than just like this fertility hormone. Just like estradiol, we have to have sufficient levels of it, not too high, not too low, and that we're not supposed to have these like flatlined hormones. There's this ebb and this flow that we are that makes for a healthy physiological environment, and that it is more than just like, oh hey, your body fat levels. Like, you can be amenorrheic from having high body fat levels. You can be amenorrheic from low body fat levels, and there's so many different types of hormonal activity that can be going on the inside when you are amenorrheic. And it's important to explore that more. And I think that one of the best tools that we can give as coaches or educators to women is, track your menstrual cycle, and don't become hyper fixated or hyper focused on it, because ebb and flow is normal. We're all human, but things like using the basal metabolic temperature, which is your morning temperature, first thing in the morning. You can use a thermometer under your tongue as long as it goes to 2 decimal places. There's new technologies called temp drop, which is like an armband, so you don't even need to use a thermometer. There's certain like the different types of rings or even Apple Watches that can do this as well. But because progesterone increases our temperature, if you ovulate, your temperature is going to go up in that second half of your cycle. So it's an amazing tool, because this allows us to see like, hey, where's your health at? And like you said, losing your menstrual cycle during a prep is not abnormal. And I have to say, like one of my biggest kind of mentors and idols in the women's kind of reproductive and endocrinology world, she really charged this kind of front, going that female athletes, there is, this give and this take, that we need to acknowledge that not everybody is going to be able to sustain their menstrual cycle and their ovulatory capacity during periods of very high stress, whether we're talking about physiological, like training hard and dieting, or psychological stress or social stress. And that it's the responsibility, though, of us to not let this happen for too long, because there are repercussions. And so if it happens for 3 months, but you get it back, awesome. If it happens for 6 months and it's a little bit of a shakier start to get it back, well, know that it's going to be easier for you than to lose it again. It's something that's called a resilience factor, or a hypothalamic pituitary ovarian resilience. And that if you were, say, put on the pill at a young age and you were on it in that first 7 to 10 years after you went through puberty. So the first bleed is called menarche. So if you started that hormonal contraceptive, or you lost it for like your menstrual cycle for a prolonged period of time in that first 7 to 10 years, then your resilience factor is not going to be the same as somebody who didn't have that happen to them, because that roadway, that information network literally didn't get an opportunity to get built. And so as a female competitor, let's just say, who was on the pill at 13 after her first bleed, maybe she only had 2 bleeds, and then went off at 26 because her coach tells her that, like, hey, you need to come off it to get lean. Like, don't expect to get a bleed back right away. Like, rushing into a prep is not going to be the best scenario for you, or mixing in other types of PEDs. That's not going to be the best scenario for you, because I think one piece of the conversation that's really missed right now in the female PED conversation, communication, discourse, whatever we want to call it, is the fact that estradiol specifically, so there's different types of estrogens, but estradiol specifically and progesterone are incredibly important to help manage and mitigate some of the negative outcomes associated with anabolic androgenic steroids. And so if you are running, let's say, low estrogen and low progesterone, and then you just slam yourself with a bunch of androgens, there is more likely for repercussions to occur, whether that's endometrial hyperplasia, meaning that your endometrium thickens, or the presence of ovarian cysts, or even some of the more androgenic outcomes like hair growth and voice changes and acne and oily skin, because progesterone and estradiol are incredibly important to be balanced with androgens. Is so important. And that is just so lost in our community. Because I think almost progesterone and estrogen just get kind of like, oh, they're just women's sex hormones. They are not important to get jacked. It's like, no, they actually are really important to get jacked and lean.
Yeah.
Really important.
This is the thing, like they get slammed, but they don't just get slammed in females, they get slammed in males as well. Like,
absolutely.
as long as I remember, it was like, oh yeah, you want your estrogen as low as possible because it's a female derived hormone. But for some reason, then when you apply that to a female, why does it still have the same negative context? Like,
yeah,
hormones would need to be level, would need to be balanced. If they needed to be elevated, they need to be elevated accordingly, not just assume that because this is a female derived hormone, it needs to be smashed into the ground, and testosterone being the most anabolic is the one that we need to elevate. And this kind of, again, was one of the things that I really kind of like clung onto when you were talking in the podcast, is that you were saying that these all need to be elevated according to what we're seeing back or what the feedback is. And one thing that I've kind of noticed through my own coaching or my own time kind of educating and observing is that people are very quick to kind of direct a female to an androgen based kind of PD. So Anavar was crowned like the female drug of choice, but it completely contradicts what we're saying here. And obviously what we're saying here is everything does need to be balanced. You can't balance things with running 10 milligrams of Anavar per day. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing, is it's so complicated. Like, going back to that idea of resilience. So if you have a woman who's had like steady Eddie regular ovulatory menstrual cycle her whole life, and she's, let's say, 24 years old coming to you, 10 milligrams of Anavar may or may not have a impact right away, at least, on her ovulatory cycle. I have seen in practice, and I mean, there's no textbook for this stuff. One of the things we know is that when the environment outside the ovaries gets higher than the environment inside the ovaries of hormone production, then the ovaries are more likely to just be like, peace out, I'm done. Like, you got enough going on. Don't care if you're aromatizing or not. Like, you're good. I'm done.
Yeah.
That is more likely to happen when somebody's already not producing the right hormonal milieu or the hormonal environment, pardon me. And, with Anavar specifically, what we know is that, yes, it can impact an individual's hormonal milieu, but the longer you're on it and the higher you're on it, you're going to see potentially more of that happening. Whereas if it is very low and short duration of time, you may not see the same repercussions. And I use language like may not, because there is no one size fits all. Like, you just don't know. The potential benefit to using something like Anavar is that you are having more of that androgenic element than, or pardon me, anabolic element. Oh gosh, big taboo. Anabolic element than that androgenic element. And because androgenic responses are often the ones that cause those unintended impacts of virilization and hair growth and everything else, that when used in a short, like a short acting drug that you can discontinue relatively quickly if you start to see these negative things come up, is going to have potential benefits to somebody versus, say, utilizing in a long acting ester of testosterone or something like that. With that said, there just is no one size fits all to female and PED use. There's no like one protocol that everybody can use, because we're all coming to it in a different place. I mean, if we look at, I think, a male equivalent, why do some women get, let's say, virilization and other women don't? Well, why do some men bald prematurely on an androgen and some men don't?
Yeah.
Why do some men get like crazy amounts of even hair growth and thickening on secondary and some men don't? Why do some men grow like weeds on 200 milligrams of test per week and some men that doesn't even cause anything?
Yeah.
Right? We're all different and we all come into this in a different place. We are not blank slates.
And this is exactly, you hit the nail on the head. I think too many people, whether that be a competitor, whether it be a coach, I think they're trying to cram everything into one box or one size fits all. Now, whether that's from lack of education or whether that's from just being naive to what's going on, or potentially just laziness, it does seem to be that it's just, here, take some Anavar, take it for this long. And as you said, like, you might be lucky enough to get away with it for a period of time, but it's the duration. And how many people are going to be able to say, take this duration of Anavar, see really positive production and really positive results, and go, I'm done now. It doesn't really happen. You'll see people see incredible results and they'll go, oh, well, that worked very well for that long, so let's see if I can do it again.
Yeah.
Potentially take more, which then it's been creeping up and building over this period of time. And once that cup fills and you've taken that last drop, it starts overflowing and virilization does happen. There is no going back from that. And you can't tell when that cup's going to fill up. There is nothing to say. You can track on a voice app, or you can take pictures, say, like, to make sure keeping track of, like, say, clitoral enlargement. But if that drip overflows the cup, from there is no going back, and then everything from there is virilization.
Yeah. Not only that, is that, again, this goes back to, like, what are your own endogenous hormones doing at that time? Like, the longer you've been anovulatory, then now you don't have, so progesterone has a really cool anti-androgenic effect on certain cell types. So for skin and hair growth, for example. So the longer you've gone without having progesterone, and then you also have that androgen in the mix, well, then you're more likely to get yourself into trouble because your protection is no longer there. Or if you start, throwing in, let's just say, receptor sensitivity. If somebody was, say, on the pill for a long period of time, and the particular contraceptive that they were on was a potent anti-androgen, well, we don't know. Like, research has not figured out yet. Is this going to cause a hypersensitivity to the androgen receptor, meaning that they're just thirsty and whatever you throw in the mix is going to just, like, grow like a weed? Or is this going to create an insensitivity, meaning that more may be needed to elicit the response that's desired? We don't know yet, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand, is like, who you were before you decided to go on a certain drug impacts that drug, just like who you want to be moving forward is going to impact that drug. The longer you're on it, the other cofactors in place, the higher your stress levels are socially or psychologically, the more other kind of comorbidities or issues going on. All of these things change how these drugs are working in your body. Like I said, we are not blank slates. And that's something that I think with bodybuilding, we fall into this trap of like the controls. Like, because bodybuilding, coming from a science background, bodybuilding to me is a giant experiment. Like, you have, like, it goes back to basic, like, first year chem, where it's like you have that plant in that cup and you start looking at like, how am I going to make this plant grow? Okay, we put in an environment with, one with sun, one without sun, one with water, one without water. So all that is variable control. And that bodybuilding, if we think about what it's been for many, like a long time, the conversation has been, I call it like the box phenomenon, where you go, okay, I've got training in this box, and if I train, I'm going to build muscle. And then I've got diet in this box. And if I eat right, I'm going to grow muscle and lose fat. Okay. And then I've got cardio in this box, because, weights and cardio have often been split as if they're two different worlds altogether. And that cardio is what's needed for fat loss. Okay. And then I've got this box that's like PEDs. And then, walk away from that. Like, these are and with these four things, I can control exactly what I want my body to do. And if I am, 30 pounds overweight and not very muscular, I'm going to get shredded in 16 weeks with these four magic boxes. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. Like, it is so much more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, like, I say this to clients all the time. I was like, you've got internal factors, but you've also got so many external factors that you can't control from day to day that will impact everything. If your neighbors are banging on the wall at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can't sleep. That's not in a box that you can control. Like, you can maybe go to another room, but you're not going to sleep very well. Like,
Yeah.
all variables that are going to impact.
Oh, not only that, I mean, we are, various alterations and adaptations occur in our lifetime with our physiological function. And when, one of the questions that when I work with individuals and talk about, like, educate on this stuff, I always get people to think like, are you healthy? Yes or no? So many people, female, male, elite competitor versus thinking about competing. Like, are you healthy? And most people will be like, yes. And I go, okay, no, like, let's really talk about this, because health isn't just the merely like the absence of illness. Just because you're not sick or you don't have hypothyroidism, like some diagnosis, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're healthy, because health is not just our physical body. We have, I ascribe to the idea of the biopsychosocial model of health, which means that we have biological health, but we also have psychological health. And then we also have social health. And these things are interconnected. They are completely interwoven with each other. And that, some beautiful examples of like how our psychological health impacts our biological health is, the physical manifestations of anxiety and depression. What's the root cause of irritable bowel syndrome? It's anxiety. It's a somatic expression. Or with anovulatory cycles, the fact that you can induce them just by having body image dissatisfaction, like not dieting, not overtraining, just that dissatisfaction. And that often we, by the time we're in our 30s, we've lived a life, or we're in our 40s, or even for some people in their 20s. And that doesn't factor in, your genetic basis. That doesn't factor in early childhood experience, because we all are dynamic individuals.
Yeah.
All of us are. And we can obviously, improve our health state. But if you're, you sit back at the end of the day and you go, okay, am I healthy? Yes or no? If the answer is no, why or why not? And what can I do? Are there certain things that are completely like, this is the way they are now? Great, let's work with that. But if there are things we can do, like, we should be doing them. And then the second thing is like, what is your current health state? And how is this going to be influenced by, say, competition prep or PED use? And then how is it going to be, how is it going to influence it? So not only how are we going to be impacted by it, but then how is prep going to influence it? So an example of this would be, let's say you have hypothyroidism and it's managed in your pre-prep state, and then you go into a contest prep situation. Well, how is having hypothyroidism going to be influenced by prep? Are you going to need more medication to manage because your stress, physiological, psychological, social, are going to go way up? And we know stress has a massive impact on thyroid function. And then also, how is it going to impact your prep outcomes? Is it going to make it harder for you to get leaner? Is it going to change your, hormonal resilience factor? And that's something that's so lost in our world right now, because people aren't asking themselves these hard questions like, do you sleep well pre-prep? Because don't expect that to get better when you start prepping. Do you have a healthy relationship with food? Are you somebody who's formerly struggled with disordered eating or any type of eating disorder? Don't expect that that's going to be totally kosher during your prep. Like, it's just, that's not what most people are going to experience. Now, maybe you are, but for most people, there's going to be these small triggers. I mean, an alcoholic typically doesn't voluntarily go into a bar, even when they're advanced in recovery for a reason.
You just don't.
So pardon me?
You just don't take the risk, do you? It's something.
No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, like, and then even things like medication use, like, I can't. So part of my, my research and my whole world is in things called like pharmacodynamics or pharmacokinetics. So how do drugs actually talk with other drugs? And this is another thing that gets totally lost in our world, is like, okay, if you're utilizing a certain drug, or say you used a certain drug for a long period of time and now you're off of it, how is that going to influence the drugs that you want to take to be able to compete? There is an interaction, there is a relationship with that. I mean, if you're, say, on a blood pressure medication for high blood pressure, and now you're introducing clenbuterol in the mix, like, there is an interaction with these things. And that's more of an outcome interaction. There's also metabolitic interactions. Like, it is quite complicated. And I think, I've been poo-pooed in the past by people going like, oh, you overcomplicate things. And I'm like, no, it's complicated. Like, why should we pretend that it is really simple when it's not? It is really complicated, and that, your pre-existing health conditions, your future health outcomes that you want, or just other stressors, all of those things are going to influence your prep outcomes. And then, the other big question here comes like, what are you going to do about it? Because I think a lot of people might recognize like, hey, I've got acne, and it's not great, but I really want to prep. And so let's just focus on prep. Or, hey, I have, a negative relationship to food, but I really want to get my pro card this season. They sometimes will recognize these things, but then they don't take action on them.
Yeah. And
why?
Like the athlete, what I would say, becomes like the ostrich where they bury their head in the sand. And I've seen so many times where an athlete feels that prep is the answer to their problems. Like, I've had athletes that are really struggling with diet, or really struggling to stay focused on a diet, where they might be having like binging tendencies. And I hear, I just need to get back into prep. Or, oh, I'm really struggling with my body image right now. I'm really struggling with how I look. I'll be fine when I get into prep. Like, why is it prep creates this magical fix where, like you say, it's not going to fix anything? If anything, it's just going to exacerbate like the problems that you've got and cause more issues further down the line. And this is where I tend to see as well, like, females will do back-to-back preps season after season after season, and it tends to be because maybe they're just avoiding the things that need working on, or maybe it is now social media has glorified kind of the leaner, more aesthetic physique because it gets more likes, or it gets more attention, or it's something that is more advantageous than the other side of bodybuilding, which is the health side. Is, like you say, I love the fact that you touched on the health side of not just are you healthy, but what's your lifestyle like? Is your lifestyle healthy? Are you socializing with people? Are you looking after all aspects of health? And I think bodybuilders as a cohort, I think pretty much the rule of thumb, we probably all suffer a little bit with like social kind of interactions, because you only really and obviously I'm speaking quite broadly here, but I'd say the vast majority of us only really socialize with bodybuilders. We all have set routines where we wake up and eat and train all at set times. It can make social events quite difficult, and there are aspects of what we do that are very unhealthy. So not taking time away from the more controlled side, such as preps, not taking time away from food focus or body image focus, is going to create such a negative impact, which get down the line, because bodybuilding is not there forever. There will come a time where we do decide to hang up the bikini or hang up the trunks and say, right, okay, what's next for me? And then what have you built, or what have you got left after that?
Oh, absolutely. And like, I remember it was 50 years ago now. I forget what podcast it even was, but they asked me like, if you were to take out a billboard, like what would you put on it? And I always ask myself that because I think it changes, my message changes at different times. But I think right now more than ever, if I could take out a billboard, like what would it say? Is contest prep is not the time to get healthy. I
Yeah.
have seen so many people that approach it like that. Like, oh, I'll get my labs done before I start prep. Oh, and I'm like, why? It's too late then to fix whatever is going on. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Or, oh, I'll get my schedule together. Oh, I'll start prepping my food. Or, I work better with routines. And I go like, well, why can't you do a routine right now? Like, why do we need this extrinsic goal? And another thing you touched on was like the back to back. And an amazing colleague of mine, um, Dr. Michael Miltek, and he does a lot of, he's a neuroendopsychiatrist, a phenomenal human being. But one of the things that he's talked about is just the dopamine. Like when we are in an overtrained state, that alters our brain chemistry. And that actually makes us more likely to engage in an wanting to be in an overtrained state. It's like a cycle that we get in. And then you add in other parts of contest prep or dieting or drug use, and it just kind of perpetuates that hamster wheel of sorts. And the end result is this like really unhealthy state. And competitive bodybuilding at the end of the day is an extreme sport, and that competitive bodybuilding is not the same as recreational bodybuilding. Even if you want to say be like a leaner body composition than what your body is typically set point is, it doesn't mean that you can't achieve that, but that look is still very different than what you stand on stage with. Like there is the competitive bodybuilding is extreme. Like it is, if you look in more of like the kind of sociology of sport literature, like they compare it to like your pair, or what would it be an example, like bungee jumping or like downhill ski racing in the dark kind of thing. Like it's dangerous. And there's a reason for that, is because we're not just talking about this like leisurely event, this leisurely sport. And that it's one thing I think I've had to settle with my own journey, is that I will always be a recreational bodybuilder. I will never be a competitive bodybuilder because I just don't have the resources required to be a competitive bodybuilder, nor do I want to create those resources or give those resources. Not only is my health a big piece of that, but just the psychological, the sociological, coming from having an eating disorder background, it's just not aligned with who I am and who I want to be. And that's okay. There are certain kind of like the zealots of the world to go like, oh, you're only a bodybuilder if you compete. I think that's bullshit. I think you're a bodybuilder if you're using regimented, regular aerobic activity, weight training, and a nutrient dense diet to develop an intentional physique, whether that's lean or muscularity or a combination of both or strength. It's that intentional. You're not just, willy-nilly going and training 2 days a week here and there. It's the intention is such a big part of the bodybuilding journey. And that if we think of just that, that's phenomenal for health. They're across the board: blood pressure, body composition, oxidative capacity, immune system, cognitive. It's fantastic. The flip side, though, is competitive bodybuilding. It doesn't necessarily, you can maybe in the first bit of prep, or if you're kind of just dappling your toes in it, but when you get further into that pursuit of competitive bodybuilding, there's more diminishing returns to it. And it is temporary. It's meant to be temporary. Instagram has done nothing good for our world of competitive bodybuilding in terms of creating a realistic expectation of what people are capable of when you're recycling old photos or using Photoshop or just all that kind of like snake oil stuff that I don't like social media for that purpose. But I feel like there's this toxicity that's going on now with that. Just like there's a bit of toxicity, I think, too, with like just bodybuilding itself and what it takes. My husband and I talked about this the other day about, I am so grateful for all of those years in the gym, not having a flipping clue what I was doing, because I learned so much about training. I learned like, I remember being 18, 19. So I got sick at 18. So it would have been like maybe later half of 18, 19, like doing German volume training and thinking that like, this is going to be awesome. I mean, crap, I was a full-time university student who had crappy health. German volume training like destroyed me in the first week, but I tried it.
Yeah.
I remember printing off workouts, utilizing the workouts you see in magazines just to learn like these different styles of training, to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, to learn what progressive overload was, to train for strength, to train for power, to really like harness the pursuit of weight training, because that's an important part of bodybuilding. But I feel like right now people are getting lost because they're not playing in the gym. They're not learning for themselves. They're just following, this particular paradigm of training and not recognizing that, hey, that might not even work for you.
I
And
couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree
that's
more.
okay. It's just, you got to find what does.
And that's it. And I find that Instagram again is partly to blame for this, because you have these influencers that come on and show these like subpar workouts that they're doing to try and get followers and say, this is how I built this physique to earn this trophy. They're not doing that. But the individual is kind of hooked on this Instagram image, and it's like, right, that's what it takes. Oh, okay. And now I pair this with some performance enhancing drugs. 6 months, I can become an IFBB pro. Like, I have people consult with me all the time. My goal is to be an IFBB pro. And I'm like, fabulous. How much training experience have you had? I've been training for about 3 months, and I'm like, okay, like we need to wind this back a little bit, because your training experience for 3 months is probably not even close to what it's going to take to even get to a regional show, let alone IFBB standards. And I think this is the sad thing that's now happening to bodybuilding through social media, is that everything is becoming far more accessible than what it actually is.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I mean, what other sport can you buy your way into halfway through life to become a professional? That's bodybuilding. It's a commercial transaction that you're engaged in and that you can come later in life into. You don't see that in football or rugby or swimming or gymnastics. I mean, it's a very unique sport because it makes it accessible, but not for the right reasons. I love the idea of inclusivity and accessibility and all that other stuff, but let's really talk about, should everybody who's competing be competing? Do they have what it takes, or are they using drugs to gain this kind of false overload that then is going to destroy them, 6 months down the road, because they don't actually have what it takes. When I talk about genetics, it's not just like, oh, that person has wide clavicles, or oh, that person's got narrow hips. Like, it's not just your structure that could make you potentially better for competing in a certain category. Genetics are, number one, it's a complicated thing. We know so little about it. Number two, when I talk about genetics, it's not just like the genes, it's also the epigenetics. Do you have the capacity to deal with physiological stress? Do you have the stress buffering? And there's like a ton of different genes behind this. Do you have, certain genes that maybe make it so you do have higher levels of natural testosterone, or certain responses to blood glucose or insulin, or capacity for metabolizing certain things better within the gallbladder, certain axes? Like, it is so complicated. And the people that have it have it. I mean, we all know those people that, can perform at the elite level of IFBB pro bodybuilding for multiple years, continue to get better, be able to stay relatively lean in their off season, not have any negative overall health consequences, and they just keep grinding away. And they have that. I don't. I never will. And that's okay. I have acceptance. But I also recognize just how much it takes. And honestly, it's only through working with the best of the best that I've been able to really begin to see things and be like, I was not expecting your labs to look this good. And being like, there's a reason for this. Like, you have that it factor that so many other people want, but you don't cultivate that just through getting your sleep on point or taking an extended off season. Like this is what is innate to why you are one of the best of the best.
Exactly. And that's it. And some people will hate to admit it and some people will refuse to believe it, but there are people that are just generally made for this. And like
Oh, absolutely.
there should be individuals that you look at, say, like you say, blood results, or you look at their physique after what they've been through in an extensive prep, you're like, you should not be looking as good as you do right now, but you are just made for this. And we can throw the kitchen sink and more at this, and you can just take it because this is what you are made of. So I think that, again, like, many people are not being honest with themselves. And, if that's okay, like, you still want to bodybuild and you still want to compete, that's fine. But I think just risk versus reward to what you're doing. And this is kind of like bringing it back to, like, say, the PED side of things and managing your own risks versus your own rewards, is that, if you are not one of these genetically sublime people that are built for this sport, then is it worth taking those risks? Is it worth going down those routes that are potentially going to lead to more adverse consequences? Because, like I say, when bodybuilding's done, and you potentially haven't got your IFBB Pro, or you look back at this period of time and go, well, shit, actually, I wasted quite a lot of my life doing that. Was it worth it? You don't want to sit back and go, was that worth it? No, you want to look back and go, okay, well, I did this, but it was worth it because I did it in a health and safe place. I did it in a productive place, and I still managed to live my life, rather than looking back and going, I've just spent 6 years absolutely ruining my body, like literally hating life every minute because I've been chasing something that deep down I knew wasn't achievable. And now I just resent wasting the last 6 years, because that, going back to what you said, that's not healthy, like in a long shot. And it's probably going to affect you far longer than the 6 or however many years it was that you were bodybuilding and competing.
Absolutely. And it's something that, like, when individuals I work with, even like seasoned top level IFBB pros, come to me, I go, why do you want to compete? Like, why? What is it that you enjoy about this journey, or you want to do about this journey? Like, what is that thing driving it? And if you are going to tell me it's the body, that's not good enough, because that body you have for one day, sometimes 1 hour, if you did some like crazy water manipulation, if that.
Yeah.
So, like, why do you want that? Because to develop a lean muscular physique does not require the extremes of the stage. And even if you want to be able to do that, photo shoots is a great kind of outside external goal of that. You don't need to take it that far, and you can do it on your own timeline. I mean, a lot of times people, I feel like they start prepping and they're just so far away from that stage physique. You should be in striking distance at the beginning of prep and have been able to maintain it at the beginning of prep. Prep is not a time to grow, and it's not a time to get like general reductions in body fat. It's not a time to improve your health. Like, this is what this is the bodybuilding vessel that it gets lost, I think, in part with new people coming into competing. And I was one of these. I mean, back in the day, this was me when I was late teens, early 20s, being like, oh yeah, like this is an attainable physique for me. It's like, no, Victoria, it's not. And it's what I wanted. I realized, like, through a lot of, very personal like dialogue to myself, was like, I ultimately didn't like a stage physique. I never was like, oh, that is like awesome.
Yeah.
When I got really lean, like, I hated the way I looked. And so I was like, what is this worth it? And the answer to me was no. Now, I don't knock people that it's a yes, but know your purpose, know your reason, know your why, and actually see if what you're asking your body to do with extremes of competitive bodybuilding aligns with what your purpose and your why and everything else is. I mean, if you're a university student, don't fool yourself and think that you can do these both things to the best of your ability simultaneously. Or if you've just gone through a divorce, don't think of this as like your rebound kind of event that you're going to do. Like, your stress levels, psychosocial, and also because of that, the biological is interconnected, they're way too high right now for this. This is not the thing you put all of your proverbial eggs into that one basket. And the truth is bodybuilding healthy? No. Competitive bodybuilding, I should say. Can competitive bodybuilding be healthier? I think that's relative. I think that's relative to the person. I think that's relative to their journey, where they start. And at the end of the day, optimal health does not equate to optimal performance outcomes, that there is a give and a take, and that I think we can try to make it healthier, but sometimes in the act of doing that, we actually cannot help our athletes come in as lean or as hard, as grainy as they might need to get to that, top level or Olympia qualification or whatever it might be. And that is a conversation that coaches have to have, athletes have to have. We have to recognize that it's temporary. We can push ourselves into this kind of performance zone as long as we then bring ourselves back to that health zone. And the longer we're away from that health zone, sometimes the longer we have to be in that health zone to be able to actually get back to that performance zone again. And there's no time, there's no like, oh yeah, 6 months off season or whatever people are now saying. I'm like, no, the body doesn't keep a clock. I mean, yes, it does internally, physiologically, yes, but like it's going to do what it needs to do to heal and recover.
Exactly. And that is, I think, probably the perfect place to like probably wrap that up, because it is balance. It's knowing when is the right time for the right form of action. And I think that is something that's probably missed the most in this, because I know for myself, I've had consults come in where someone's like, right, I want to do a show in 16 weeks. And I'm like, we're not there. Like, there are so many points that are not right. And they're like, okay, well, I'll go find somebody else then. It's like, you're looking for bias advice that you want, not what you need to hear. And I think that is, again, like having someone on much smarter than myself basically saying the same thing of, sometimes you just need to listen to the internal answers of what's going on before you do dive into these things, such as a contest prep or performance enhancing drugs. You need to look at everything else around that. So beautiful way to top it off there, Victoria. I love that.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize I did that, but I'm glad I did.
No, perfect. I did get a couple of questions though, so we can finish. You're happy with that?
Absolutely.
I'll bring them up. Go through what was asked. So, top 3 things someone should ask themselves or think about before considering PEDS.
Great question. Oh, great question. So if we're talking, maybe let's narrow it to women, because then I can tailor it a little bit more. So number 1 would be, are you healthy? And I'm going to use that and kind of expand on that, but are you healthy? Kind of what I talked about in the podcast. But to me, one of the things that we have to put in there is like, what's your reproductive status? Are you having a regular ovulatory menstrual cycle? Because we know that's an indicator of health, and then that also promotes health. And if the answer is no, then right away I can say, no, you're not healthy. We need to figure out why and pursue that. So 1 would be like, are you healthy? Number 2 is, do you recognize the unintended outcomes that can happen with anabolic androgenic steroid use or just general PED use? And by that, I mean, it's not just for women like, oh, virilization. Do you understand the long-term potential changes that you're making to your physiological, psychological, and social environment? Social environment doesn't always get talked about because people don't like, I mean, it's like, my shit doesn't affect anybody and I don't care what other people think, but actually, yeah, they do, because they come to me when they're, done competing and go like, I don't like having a deep voice. People stare at me funny. And it's like, ship has sailed, like, sorry, you might have thought you were untouchable in your 20s, but it's a bit more complicated than that. And that's where, yes, who you are today is not who you're going to want to be tomorrow. Just trust me when I say that. Because sometimes you don't see it until you're no longer in it. And you'll be like, I don't want kids. Well, maybe you didn't want them in your 20s, but things might change in your 30s or even into your 40s. So do you fully understand the impacts of using these drugs? And number 3, do you have a trusted advocate or ally on your side. Because I personally don't believe it's a journey that we should be doing alone. There's a reason why doctors cannot prescribe their own medication. Even if you're a doctor and you have that RX pad right in front of you, you cannot legally write yourself your own script. If not, we would have doctors on like barbiturates and antidepressants and everything else, because human nature is that we want to feel good. We want to feel the best that we can. And then you mix some of like the crazy neurochemistry involved with competitive bodybuilding and everything else. And it's like, yeah, there's an addictive component to that. So I truly believe that it's not a journey you should be doing alone. And that having a trusted and educated ally or advocate to help you is so important. And that also fits with like, do you have a medical professional overseeing your general health right now? And if the answer is no, I mean, don't step on that train yet, because it is so important to have that relationship established before, even if say your doctor retires or whatever else. At least you're in the medical system. At least you're getting regular, as a woman, Pap smears done. At least you're getting regular gynecological checks, or if you're over the certain age cohort or certain risk factor, you're getting your mammograms done, your bone mineral density scans done, general just physicals, because that is so important to managing any type of medication, any type of pharmaceutical substance. And so have that in place.
Spot on, nailed that. Like I would say exactly the same thing. So next one I've actually done an educational video on, so I'm going to pass this on as well. So top tips on keeping acne down for a PED user.
Okay, so this is going to be relative to what your acne and skin was like before you started that drug. That whole kind of pop culture saying of like, you see a normal vehicle and you're like, that's a vehicle. And you see like a monster truck and you're like, that's a vehicle on steroids, like that extreme. Like acne does not get better when you're on steroids. It just becomes acne on steroids. Like it becomes this more extreme version. Even if it's say like more of like a follicular based acne versus like a cystic acne, you're still getting these subcutaneous skin changes to inflammation, to sebaceous glands, to kind of androgen binding. Then there's also some insulin components mixed in. So I think number one would be like, what was your acne or skin conditions before you started? And if this was something that say you struggled with in puberty, but now you're in your 20s and it's been smooth sailing, recognize that. Why did you have that through puberty? Was that because your hormones were higher than your body was used to? Was that because it was the highs and lows of, that roller coaster of hormone development? Because if so, we're going to be going back there. Like we're going back there. And so when I talk to people about this, that's one of the things I really try to get across is like, we have to recognize the history of our skin here. We have to recognize where we've come from and what are we doing to manage it. I think another really important piece too is that often those skin changes are happening. There are some like early signs that things are starting to change. So for example, sebaceous glands. So your skin gets more oily. Well, the skin usually gradually gets a little bit oily, a little bit at a time, until all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I'm super oily now. Learn and listen and watch, because if you can catch it early and manage it gently, not just like eradicating, like using super drying stuff, because that's going to actually create more sebaceous gland production. But if you can catch things early and start to manage it, you might be able to stop it from going into that kind of like extreme zone. And that's a big thing I see. Another thing with women in particular I see is that cystic acne is connected to the hair follicle. So when you get this increase androgenic binding, increase 5-alpha reductase, we can develop thick, dark facial hair, and that often cystic acne is connected to that follicle. At least that's the latest kind of research, the latest theories on this. And so for some acne, it is a bit more complicated than just like getting Clearasil or whatever people use for that. Like it is a bit more complicated than that. But I definitely feel like if you can find a management plan early on, we can definitely decrease the overall outcome. But then also your internal health has to still be being managed, like getting the proper vitamins and minerals we know that are really protective for skin, making sure that we are staying hydrated, making sure that our digestion and our liver function and everything else is going really well, because all of those things are also going to impact our skin. And so to kind of ask ourselves, what are we doing on that internal and that external? I feel that that is something that sometimes gets lost in bodybuilding, is that, or at least fitness industry overall, is they focus so much on the internal, like you can fix everything with like this cocktail of supplements or this whatever. You, for a lot of times, skin and hair, it's an internal external game. We all have internal things we have to do, and then there are also external things we have to do, such as certain topical agents. And the pharmaceutical world, I mean, there is some really cool things, but it totally depends person to person, and what that kind of root cause of the acne is.
Absolutely. And to kind of touch on that is starting with the ABCs. Like you say, if your micronutrients and minerals aren't in the right place and oxidative stress is high, and you're not looking after that, then of course you're going to get those problems. So if you're not having a well-balanced diet, or you're not looking after your skin, like you've said, with the externals and externals, like yes, you're going to have issues. Don't just start at X, Y, and Z when someone says, oh, metformin is a great antioxidant. Take that will help with skin, because okay, it is good, but are you utilizing the ABCs first? Like, is your sleep in the right place? Is your stress levels in the right place? Yes, you are now taking anabolic steroids, which is going to cause more oxidative stress. Therefore, yes, of course, you're going to run the risk of it. But what other levels of oxidative stress have you got coming in as well? So yeah, definitely. This again, it goes back to the cohort that I think bodybuilders love to get into the X, Y's, and Z's of things. Like, let's take this compound that counteracts this compound because this works in a synergistic way to this. Like, okay, but how much fruit and vegetables are you eating? Like, simple things like that just seem to go amiss quite a lot, I think.
I mean, and there's debates, and there's science is, I mean, at its crux, academia, science is educated guesses that get debated. Like that is what we do. You could have somebody do the same experiment with the same materials in two different parts of the world and have totally different outcomes based off of their training and their environment and everything else. And so science is about making the best guess that we can, and then being able to support it and being able to talk about it in a unemotional, very basic sense with another person that is challenging you. Great, cool. So with skin stuff, it's like there is so many different avenues. Like there are people that truly see milk and dairy, specifically cow dairy, as being a potential underlying factor in developing certain types of inflammatory acne. There is other research that says, no, we were wrong. Or maybe that's not the case. I think the important thing is to think to yourself, okay, could this be a potential factor for me? I'm not going to like scream it out and like create a gospel about this thing, but maybe this could be something, because at the end of the day, the research and how that interacted in that research group's bodies is going to be different because human beings are different. And so I often tell people, like, just consider these things. I'm not saying this is like the linear, cow's milk will cause you acne. Maybe it's going to be based off of your epigenetics or your genetics. Maybe it's going to be based off of your overall inflammatory capacity in your body at that point in time. But it could also be something that you could try doing as a little experiment. Just see what it does. It may have a really awesome outcome for you, because I mean, bodybuilders eat a lot of inflammatory foods. So, I mean, we're all about the eggs and the milk. And so we got to be able to understand that these things may not be the case for you, but they might be the case for me. And that's okay.
100%. 100%. So the last one, we kind of spoke about contraception a little bit before hitting record. But I think this would be a nice one to end on. So the female said, is there a particular contraceptive that you would recommend over another one for a female PED user? Or would you say it's best to just stay off all contraceptive completely?
Okay, so here's my shtick on contraceptives. So hormonal contraceptives are only one type of contraceptive agents. Contraceptive agents, if you think about it as like a big umbrella, there are hormonal is like one major categorization, and then non-hormonal is another major categorization. So when we think of non-hormonal contraceptives, these are things like the condom, the diaphragm, the spermicide. One of the best ones would be, it's called a FAM method, or fertility awareness, which is basal metabolic temperature. So that same thing that I recommend women doing to be able to better understand their ovulatory capacity is also what you can use to track and monitor when you are fertile. And then be able to plan, sexual excursions around that or use protection. And its efficacy is really, really great. So, hormonal versus non-hormonal. So when we talk about non-hormonal, copper IUDs is in there because copper IUD, even though it's an intrauterine device, it doesn't have a hormonal reservoir that, say, a progesterone, specifically like a Mirena or a Skylena or Jaden. I mean, there's tons of different trade names and different doses and everything else have, but the copper IUD, it's not benign. So you are having a copper device implanted into your uterine cavity, and that, by nature of what it's doing, is creating inflammation. That's how it's stopping the sperm from, being productive and fertilizing. So when we're creating localized inflammation, it's not like it just stays there. It's not like your uterus is this like inflammatory trap and nothing can, get in or out. It's a lot more complicated than that, because often individuals that will have copper IUD will experience greater cramping episodes. Well, cramping is at its crux, it's prostaglandins, which is an inflammatory property or principle, biochemical, whatever you want to call it, but it's creating this inflammation, which then creates a reinforcement in that uterine wall. And if there's enough estrogen in the environment, you're actually going to create this lovely cycle where you're going to create this just firestorm of inflammation, and that will actually cause heavier bleeding, clotting, just by having that inflammatory environment. So that's not benign to the rest of your body. Furthermore, we know that because it's creating this more inflammation, it can also negatively impact ovulation. It's not like you are going to ovulate every single time you get a menstrual cycle or a menstrual bleed when you have a copper IUD in place. So now looking at the hormonal. So why would people use a hormonal contraceptive? And I mean, at the end of the day, they offer two main things for a contraceptive purposes. One is they disallow ovulation from either fully occurring, because ovulation is going to create that environment. Number two is there's bleeding control. Bleeding control, though, it doesn't actually have anything to do with the contraceptive benefits. It just is kind of along for the ride. So with a hormonal contraceptive, whether we're talking about a implant, which is in your arm typically, or a patch, or a pill, or a shot, or a hormonal IUD. I mean, there's so many different types now. They all have a progesterone in it, and some of them will also have an estrogen in it. And that progesterone is not progesterone. It is not. So it's not what your body actually makes. And when you start getting down into this is what my research is on, the deep down and dirty of them, is that they don't have the same physiological benefit as progesterone. They don't do the same things for our brain, for our bone, for our blood vessels, for our breast health. They're not the same thing. It's a wolf in sheep's clothes. So you are introducing this drug into the body that not only is going to be detrimental to, ovulation, even if there are certain ones that say they ovulate. I got to say the research on that depends on the person and a whole bunch of other things. But it also is going to potentially have an impact on how, say, a PED is going to work. Because a lot of these progesterones, there's a great portion of the progesterones in contraceptives that are an anti-androgen. So they are going to block those androgen receptors. Well, that's going to impact how that drug that you're going to take for your bodybuilding is going to actually work. Not only is it going to be potentially either not advantageous or far more risky. The risk of blood clots are already high in certain contraceptives. Then you add an androgen in the mix. Not good, not okay at all. And again, different contraceptives are going to have different properties. I can't say, though, is one better than the other when we're talking about hormonal contraceptives? Because it depends on who are we talking about. Does this person have a troubled reproductive past? Have they had amenorrhea and polycystic ovarian diagnoses, or were they put on pills at young ages? Because their ability to kind of like have that fortitude to be able to have that resilience is a lot different than somebody who has. And if we're talking short-term use versus long-term use, initially the oral contraceptive pill was only approved for 3 to 6 months of use. I mean, I work with women all the time that come to me to get help after 28, 30, 35 years of being on this substance. And I mean, last but not least, the likelihood for your reproductive axes to be completely castrated is quite high on many hormonal contraceptives. When we put that into the kind of the mix of bodybuilding, that's also creating an environment where you're going to be likely to castrate. And then we're also adding in PEDs, which are going to be likely to castrate depending on, if you're not using them properly. That can be really, really scary. And what I see in my, consulting work is often it doesn't necessarily happen right away. It's like these small fractures begin to occur in somebody. And so, try to, wrap this up quickly. Would I advise it, hormonal contraceptive and an androgen? I don't think we have the research necessary to decide if that's safe or not. And I think it's relative to the individual. I think that if you're going to use the safest option, I mean, the FAM method is awesome. It's great. And if you want to double load using FAM and even a female diaphragm, awesome. You get fitted for one often, and partner doesn't feel it, and you're in charge, right? You're the one that gets to make that decision about your reproductive choice, because I am still pro-choice at the end of the day. I think that non-hormonal methods, though, or non-invasive methods are the way to go for long-term health. If you are going to use a copper IUD, you better be tracking ovulation and ensuring that you're regularly ovulating. And if you're not, then you might need to go down that road of like a cyclical micronized progesterone. And you got to be managing inflammation like a beast. Because if you don't, I mean, high inflammatory environments are what breeds things like endometriosis. And so it doesn't happen today or tomorrow. It might be down the road when you're just constantly creating these high levels of inflammation.
100%. 100%. Well, there we go, guys. That wraps it up. Today's guest, Victoria Felkar. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Victoria, let the guys know where they can find you, whether it's like on Instagram, YouTube. Let them know where they can discover more of your stuff, because it'd be a shame to not have it out there.
Yeah, so my website is just victoriafelkar.com. My Instagram is the same. Facebook is the same. And YouTube, I believe, is the same. Haven't uploaded a YouTube video, though, in a minute. And I'm also not awesome at social media. I really just need somebody to help me with my social media at this point, because I've done so many podcasts, and they're all on my website, but I'm like, I need to try to find a way that I can get clips out of these things to keep that conversation going, because I think it is so important. I do consulting work right now. I take on very few clients though with that, but in the next 6 months, I got some big projects I'm working on for education, opportunities for everybody. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, more seminars hopefully in the future too.
Perfect. There we go, guys. That has it, Victoria Felkar. So, guys, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. It has been an absolute pleasure being on your airways and your screen. Stay tuned, because there will definitely be more coming. But for now, take care, much love, and I will see you all soon.